It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 42, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. My guest today is Valley Flora's Zoe Bradbury. Zoe grew up on her family homestead in Southern Oregon, just a few miles from the Pacific Ocean. She left at 16 and came back many years later to a farm where her mother and sister had started growing and selling vegetables. Many years later, Valley Flora feeds over 100 CSA members and provides produce to dozens of restaurants and stores in the 50-mile radius around their farming collective, as well as a farm stand and U-Pick operation on the farm. We discuss how she, her sister, and her mother have integrated the troublemaker of the family, that's Zoe, into the existing farming ventures, including the nuts and bolts of how the three separate farming operations cooperate to market together and share resources. Zoe shares her experience about the joys and challenges of farming with children, integrating horses into the operation, marketing in a rural environment, and living off the farm. Zoe brought a ton of energy and insight to this conversation. I hope you get as much out of it as I did. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Vermont Compost, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality composts and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service. BCSAmerica.com. Zoe Bradbury, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be with you.
Thanks so much for making time this morning. I know it's kind of a gray and rainy day here in the upper Midwest. You live in Oregon on the coast, so I assume it's a gray and rainy day there as well.
Believe it or not, we live in this pretty remarkable pocket where we get these great, crazy, blustery 100-mile-an-hour wind storms and pelting hail, and then the next day it'll be blue skies and sunny. And so we're having a blue sky and sunny day.
All right. Well, thanks for taking time on a blue sky and sunny day to talk to us here.
Sure.
Like I do with all of my guests, I've gone and done a little bit of snooping around on the internet, so I happen to know that you grew up there on the piece of land that you're farming now.
That's right, yeah. We're in Southern Oregon, about 70 miles north of the California border, just a few miles inland from the coast. And that's right, there's 80 acres up Flora Creek that my family, my mom and dad, stumbled upon back in the early, mid-'70s. It's been 40 years now that my mom's there, so I think it was early 70s.
Wow.
And it's actually a funny story. I mean, it's not like I come from a farming family, runs deep in the blood or anything like that. I mean, my mom was born in Manhattan. My dad was from Chicago. They ended up in San Francisco on a work study, Antioch College gig. Came up to the Oregon coast for a weekend and really, really liked it. And they fell into the restaurant business with some friends and pretty much decided after a year of flipping burgers and making milkshakes for the church crowd that maybe that wasn't quite what they wanted to do. And they ended up, well, I should say my dad, he traded the restaurant for 40 acres up Flora Creek. And, it's hard to imagine now because it's such the center of the universe for us all. But back then, it was a rundown farmhouse, and my mom just took one look and said, "Are you crazy? What are you doing?" So they settled there, and my mom actually is the one who really, really fell deep for the place. And my dad, meanwhile, got into a political career and ran for elected office, and his whole trajectory took him to Salem and into state office for the rest of my childhood. But my mom really settled in there, and ultimately, and my sister and I were both born there in the house, home birth, and grew up there, just fully immersed in that valley and Flora Creek and all the surrounding hills and forests and creeks. And I mean, it was about as good a place to grow up and roam as you could imagine for a kid.
Yeah, kind of full hippie in Southern Oregon.
Well, my mom would deny that to her. She will deny that to her grave, that she was ever a hippie. And we've teased her and said, we've seen those photos of you in those bell bottoms and that long hair parted down the middle. And I mean, you really, really look like the album cover, Mom. And she, no, I was never a hippie. So I don't know. You can draw your own conclusions from, the 70s, Southern Oregon, back to the land, call it what you want. But she, nevertheless, I mean, she figured out how to carve out a life there and a small livelihood and raise Abby and I. Abby's my older sister, 3 years my senior. And, she just sort of put herself into that world and that reality, having never grown up with it, never run a chainsaw or, built a chicken coop or grown her own vegetable garden. And she just figured it out. So we grew up with a great garden. And by the time I was 6, she'd gotten into raising sheep for meat production. So we had a flock of sheep that I helped with when I was a kid. And, but no like commercial vegetable operation the way it is now. That really didn't happen until fast forward, 15 years when Abby and I were in college and started to get real interested in that side of farming. So, yeah.
So you left the farm and went to Stanford, right? I
did. Yeah. I left the farm actually when I was 16, which was both exciting and utterly heartbreaking because I obviously, loved where I grew up more than anywhere in the whole world. But the school system was for want of certain stimuli. Rural timber economy, tax base based on the timber, the tanking timber industry. So the public schools were not exactly where I was getting my education, I guess. We were lucky that our folks really got us out in the world and we traveled with them and they exposed us to all kinds of great things and zany individuals and eccentric experiences and gave us some perspective other than just Curry County. So when I was 16, I got an offer to go to Simon's Rock College in Massachusetts, which is a early entry college in the Berkshires, a part of Bard College. And they take kids, who are sophomores in high school, and you basically drop out of high school and then you go and get either a 2 or a 4-year degree there on campus. So I ended up getting a full ride scholarship for 2 years there. And it was just too much money to turn down, knowing how much college costs and also, intriguing, the idea of going back east and diving into something more academic. So off I went. And Abby actually, she was 3 years older than I, but had taken a year off after she graduated from high school. And that same year, she went to Middlebury in Vermont. So my mom lost both of her little birdies from the nest in the same,
and lost both of you to the East Coast, too.
Within
That's
2
kind of
weeks
brutal.
Of each other. I think it was really brutal. Now that I'm a parent, I can barely imagine what she went through. So, we had East Coast ties because of my mom's family being from back east, and we'd spent quite a bit of time there and quite a bit of time in Vermont, actually, with friends there. And my mom was conceived in Stowe, Vermont, so she had major connections to that part of the world. But nevertheless, there we were, 3,000 miles away. I was 16 and Ab was 19, and I got my start in school those 2 years early, basically got an associate's degree when I would have been getting a high school diploma. And then took a year off, ultimately transferred to Stanford and finished up my BA there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did some other things before you came back to the farm, right?
Yeah. I kind of launched out of my undergrad with this real social mission, like probably a lot of my generation has, wanting to, change the world and make it a better place. And so I got into the nonprofit world in the sustainable ag context and I worked for a whole bunch of different organizations, from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy out in Minneapolis to the ALBA in the Salinas Valley. And all of it was, advocating for sustainable ag or for farm workers or organics or a variety of things, projects I worked on. But, within a couple years of being at the desk in front of the computer, I was really starting to realize that I wasn't feeling happy or fulfilled. And it was hard to come to terms with why that was, because all these mission statements that for these organizations I worked for were fantastic and had great projects on the ground. But, it finally dawned on me, like, I want to be the person doing the farming, not the person supporting the farmers. So I ended up moving up to Portland, Oregon. I got a job as a crew manager at Zoe Island Organics and spent the next 3 years working full time with them. And that was phenomenal. It was sort of like, organic farming grad school where I got to be part of the management crew, and I had the really fortunate situation of having a salary and health insurance and all those things that are sometimes.
All those really nice benefits.
Yeah. And often just out in the ether when you're farming, and also got to like basically learn everything about that operation, from the irrigation systems and the harvest systems and the varieties we grew and the timing and the planning tools and the whole marketing side of it. It was just full immersion, and I completely credit my time at Zoe Organics for setting me up to be able to launch my own business successfully, because they had great systems and great staff, and yeah, I just learned a ton there.
So you were there for a few years, and then, if I understand correctly, you made the move back home. I
did. Yeah, I actually, after I left Zoe Island, I went back and got my master's degree, and I used my master's in part to prepare for starting my own farm business. I was able to do my business plan. It was crafty. I did some serious double dipping that really, by the time I came out of grad school, I had a master's, but I also had a business plan and, budgets and all the business side of things, plus a crop plan for my first season. So I moved back in 2008, and we had been preparing for my return for a year or so. We'd put up a deer fence around the rest of our bottom land in 2007, and then cover cropped it that winter, and then started my first actual year of production and cash cropping in 2008 at a pretty small scale. I basically came home to a small farm that was already in existence. I have to back us up to 98, 99, when Abby and I both went off to college. Like I said, she ended up at Middlebury, and she became friends with and then ultimately started dating Pete Johnson, who I know through the podcast.
Yeah.
So
Pete's
Pete
been on the podcast.
Of Pete's Greens in Vermont. He and Abby were together for a few years while she was at college. And that was the same time that Pete was just getting really interested in farming as well. And his senior thesis was to build an unheated greenhouse on the Middlebury campus and to grow salad greens through the winter in an unheated greenhouse. And Abby helped him build it. And she just had this epiphany, like, if you can grow salad mix in an unheated greenhouse through a frigid Vermont winter, you sure as hell can grow salad greens outside in a mild Oregon summer. So she came home, and we had intended to have a little pesto farm the year before. We had quit our summer jobs, landscaping for a local lady. We were tired of shoveling gravel and bark mulch for minimum wage and working for someone else. So the entrepreneurial spirit was born in us of a product of just sheer worker misery,
right?
For someone else. And so we decided we would have a pesto farm. So we were going to plant garlic. We came home at Christmas break from the East Coast, planted garlic in our bottom land, and we were going to plant the basil and make pesto. This was our grand idea. No certified kitchen anywhere in sight, and all those details we hadn't really thought out. But so it would turn out it was a major El Nino year, and the whole bottom field flooded and rotted our garlic. So when we came home from school in May at the end of the year, Abby turned it under and decided to grow salad mix instead. And it was great. The famous line in our family is, my mom, ever the skeptic and cynic, says, this is Curry County. No one is going to buy that yuppie food here.
Well, and seriously, because when I had some contact with Southern Oregon back in like the very early 1990s and late 80s. And my memory then is, this was an area where they used to have bounties on ponytails.
Yeah.
And they used to offer bounties on spotted owls.
Yeah.
This was not a real upscale left-leaning type of community.
Not so much. Yeah. And that's kind of the beauty of it too, is that it's not all that. It's not Portland. It's not Montpelier. It's its own crusty blend. And honestly, that at that time in late 90s, when Abby decided to do this, she was a little bit ahead of the curve. But lucky for her, there were just enough receptive chefs and a couple of the health food stores And combined with all that, an absolutely beautiful product that she started to produce, it flew. And it didn't hurt at all that she was this gorgeous 20-year-old lass going to town and knocking on the back doors of these restaurants and offering up this gorgeous salad in front of this gorgeous face. And we used to joke that we needed to get her a fake wedding ring to go on her delivery route, because she was getting, all kinds of proposals at all these kitchens around town.
It's just possible the salad greens wouldn't have sold as well.
Right,
with the fake wedding ring.
So that first summer, she basically started to develop this really loyal clientele, because Abby's a perfectionist, and she doesn't let a single marred leaf go past her in her wash tub. So, and she's still that way. There's beautiful flowers in her mix, and every leaf is cut at the perfect place. No stem, no cut leaf. It's just phenomenal. And she just developed a really solid reputation for this quality product that, obviously, where we live, we're like the last stop on the Cisco truck. So the stuff that these restaurants and stores are used to getting starts to rot the day they get it, or it's already started to rot when they receive it. So to get this totally fresh product that lasts for a couple of weeks and is beautiful to behold, I think it was an easy sell. So she started that business, and then, of course, she wasn't done with college, so she had 3 months at home, and then in late August had to go back to Vermont. And my mom, who's no dummy, basically took note, having had to eat her words about no one's going to buy that yummy fruit, and she realized, well, it's only August, I might as well keep cutting those greens while Abby's at school. So she finished off Abby's outdoor season, and then, the wheels are turning in my mom's head, and she realizes, well, I can keep this going through the winter and keep all these accounts happy so that, it's just this constant supply. It's ready to go when Abby comes home from college again. So she decided to put up a couple of greenhouses and start growing them indoors through the winter. So we've basically start this whole system where we've got Abby's greens from May through October, and then Abby's mom's greens from November through April. And that's still how it is to this day. My mom actually still does the winter greens production, even though Abby now lives here full time. And Abby does the outdoor season. But in that way, my mom essentially backed herself into the produce business unwittingly, because she had put up these greenhouses that she grew salad in through cold months. And then she had these empty greenhouses in the summer. So she started growing tomatoes and peppers and basil and cukes and eggplants. And, where we are, it's not blazing hot in the summer. So most of the solanaceous crops and the cucurbits and basil, it can use a little help from some greenhouse plastic. So.
Yeah, because you mentioned that you were right down there on the coast.
Yeah. And we're about 4 miles inland, so we're just out of the fog belt, and we have a pretty fierce north wind here in the summer. So fortunately, we're up the valley, so that wind is mostly blocked. And we have a really sweet microclimate given what the rest of it is like just a few miles down the road. But still, to get a tomato in July, we need a greenhouse. So anyway, suddenly my mom is, selling produce right alongside Abby, and they're delivering out in the back of the Volvo station wagon and just going around town and selling their stuff. And it went on like that for, like 8-9 years until I came back in 2008. And that's when we did the big expansion out into the rest of the bottomland.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting that you do in your farm is, you came back and became part of the farm, but at the same time, you've got your own operation. Can you tell us a little bit about how that whole setup works?
Yeah, this often, even a lot of people who buy our food locally don't even know we're set up this way because it's confusing to them. But, because my mom and sister already had their businesses going when I returned, there obviously was some growing pains and concerns about my arrival. That, I've always been teased about being the one in the family who likes to stir things up. And unlike my sister, I really like change. I like the challenge of something new, and she likes to figure something out and do it really well and consistently. And so my mom, meanwhile, this is like her place, her land, her life, her little bliss bubble. And so here comes the the youngest, ready to
here comes trouble.
Yeah, shake things up on the farm. And so we ultimately decided that it wasn't going to work to just all clump together and be one business, because I was an unknown. They didn't know, and I didn't know how much I was going to grow and what I was going to make. And obviously there was a ton of work for me to get started in terms of developing the field I was going to use. And so it just seemed easier to stay 3 separate businesses. And we did that. We've all established ourselves as individual LLCs. My mom has one, Abby has one, and I have one. And then we created a 4th entity, an LLC, that is Valley Flora. And Valley Flora operates as pretty much just the distribution umbrella. And at the end of the day, QuickBooks sorts it all out for us, so we know what to pay ourselves at the end of each month. Every single thing we sell in QuickBooks is coded to an account. So if it leaks on the invoice, it's going into the Zoe sales bucket. And if it's Abby's greens, it's going into Abby's. And if it's tomatoes, it's going into my mom's. And so it's a really simple, easy, quick tool. At the end of the month, we just print out a custom summary report and everyone gets paid. So Valley Flora as a distributor isn't marking anything up. It's just a pass through. And it's worked really, really beautifully, because it meant that as a family, we could all farm together side by side, but there's none of the tension around being told what to do by someone else or working more or less than someone else. Everyone just can be their independent operator, and we can still have a nice time on family dinner night at the end of the week. You know, because there were, regardless, even though we did it this way, there was still a lot of growing pains the first couple of years and sorting things out and trying to figure out, okay, well, who's responsible for how much of that irrigation main line, you know, or the deer fence, or these major infrastructure investments, the new barn, the walk-in cooler, all that stuff that had to get paid for. And it still wasn't totally clear how much of it each of us was going to be using or responsible for. And we've since. How
did you resolve those kinds of issues? Because I mean, those seem like the sorts of things that, like, well, we can figure it out. But I also know that those are the kinds of things that can tear partnerships apart.
Yeah. And we definitely had our fair share of tears and disagreements. But fortunately, you know, the love prevailed. And ultimately, the way we deal with it is by percentage. So QuickBooks, again, is our friend there. And we know at the end of a season what percentage of the sales were mine and what percent were Abby's and what percent were my mom's. And so any expenses that accrue throughout the year to Valley Flora, we actually have this epic end of year settle up that it used to be a 3-day meeting where we all got together with our checkbooks and our laptops and all of our records, and we just like write checks back and forth to each other for 3 days trying to settle out all of the shared expenses. And we've gotten it honed so that it's really a 1-day thing now, and you know, we know what we need to know to settle it up. So there is still that element to it. And at this point, the percentages that each of us take in a year are pretty consistent. Like I'm about 65, 68% of the gross on the farm, and Abby's about 22, and my mom's the balance, or it's something like that. That first year we didn't know yet, and I obviously was my first year, and I wasn't growing a lot yet. So in that first year, I think that was why there was as much tension as there was, because we didn't have clear-cut percentages or numbers yet to base any of those payouts on. But even that said, we did a pretty good job of making it equitable. And everyone just sometimes has to sort of take a knee and do it for the team, and it all hopefully evens out in the end, and everyone can feel like it's fair.
So you guys market all your product together, and it's not all going just to stores and restaurants. You also do a CSA. Yeah,
right. So yeah, the public knows us as Valley Flora. It keeps it simpler that way, and we are just one entity in the eyes of the public. And The CSA is probably over half of the gross on the farm. We have 110 shares that we market, and we don't offer any different, split shares or different sizes. It's just one size fits all. And so a number of people will share a share because it's a lot of food. So I don't know actually how many mouths are eating it, but it's definitely a few hundred folks. Okay. And the way that works is I manage the CSA, and my mom and sister, though, because my mom has, a whole corner on certain products like tomatoes and peppers and all these things that are staples in the CSA at points of the year. She grows them and then basically sells them to the CSA at wholesale and delivers them down to our barn for pack out. So she knows that, for instance, on a Tuesday, she needs to come up with, enough peppers for 58 members and enough tomatoes for 58 members. And whether it's by the pound or by the count, she'll get all of her stuff sorted up in her packing shed, which is right next to our house. Our barn is just down at the bottom of the driveway where the cooler is and the big wash tables and pack out space. And, by 2:00 or 3:00 on Tuesday, she'll have delivered all of her stuff into the barn so that we can then assemble and pack all of the boxes. And then she just invoices QuickBooks for that produce, whatever she provided the CSA that day. And at the end of the month, she gets paid for her CSA produce out of the CSA account. So it works pretty slick.
It seems like an interesting combination of touchy-feely and QuickBooks, frankly.
Yeah.
Which I like that, right? Ideally, I always like to say, that you should be making your decisions with your head, but you should be making them from your heart.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you think it would be different if you were doing this with friends rather than with family, or with people who your primary relationship was through the business?
Not necessarily. I mean, you can't really argue with QuickBooks. So it's been great in that way. It just turns it into this objective thing as opposed to a subjective emotional battleground. And I think it would work even with just a friend or another business partner.
What's been the biggest challenge about doing it with family?
Well, I guess those challenges evolve as the farm matures. We're in our 8th season, and a lot of things are now pretty stable and reliable. But in the beginning, it had a lot to do with I guess, disturbing the lifestyle bliss that my mom had really cultivated around herself for 30 years. She's just created a place that everyone wants to be. It's totally wonderful. And so to have this business suddenly pop up and kind of explode around her life, and there's all this more traffic on her driveway and just more chaos and stress because we're suddenly running this much higher profile business. And it's in startup mode. So there's money stress and there's infrastructure that has to be built. We need a cooler. Now, it's June. That kind of stuff. It's just inevitable that it sort of seeped over into her life, which she had really cultivated a life of making just enough money and loving her evenings on her back porch while the sun goes down and her afternoons at the creek for a swim in the summer. And my arrival definitely, I don't know. We still do those things, but there's just a faster pace about the place now because of the business. And she was adamant that, she wanted to protect that. And I really respect her for that because, at that time I was 26 or 27 and in that highly energetic business startup place, and she was 50 something and kind of on the other side of that hill. So that's where the tension really arose, was me feeling like, here I am trying to make my business and my livelihood grow wings on her land and not having ownership of it and not having full control or power over the things she said I could and couldn't do. And we definitely locked horns a number of times. I felt indignant, like, oh, just, like there's a stranglehold over me. But ultimately, we've mellowed into our relationship, and I think really come to appreciate and respect how all the parts work together to support each other. It's pretty beautiful choreography now. Now that everyone maybe has just gotten used to the new reality, or we've also tamed it back a little bit because we're not in startup mode. And
you're not 27 anymore.
Not 27. I'm now mother of 2, and I have a husband, and it's like, okay, I have a family that needs my time and attention also. And that was especially this year, I have a 10-month-old, and to suddenly be farming with 2 kids in tow, I definitely had the hardest season ever this year of just trying to pull it off and have enough hours in the day to nurse a baby and get a kid off to preschool and get to the harvest in time to farm in time to harvest before it's too hot and find the childcare. And oh man, I had moments where I said words I'd never said out loud, which is, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. I never said that.
Oh, I thought maybe they were 4-letter words that you hadn't said out loud.
Oh man. But so, it's really humbling to come up against that and just to realize that, okay, I all the last 4 years of having Cleo, my first child, I have been a farmer. And I have a kid, and she's, in the backpack, comes with me, goes with me everywhere, a part of the farm. Now that there's 2 and you've got like a 4-year-old and an infant, I had to realize, like, I'm a mother and I'm a farmer too. It had to flip a little bit in order for me to not lose my mind, to recognize that these human beings that I've given life to, they have needs. And it's like, oh my God, you have to poop again now? just when you're getting started on something and you finally like, oh, and then you get interrupted and you gotta just take a deep breath and okay, here we go. We're going to go poop.
So tell me about that. Not so much about the poop, but about the. You said things had to change. You had to reshuffle your priorities and put the kids first.
Yeah.
How did you keep the farm running while you made those changes in priority?
Well, I think a lot of it was actually a mental shift, because in my mind, every morning I have this to-do list, and the to-do list doesn't really take into account these 2 little kids because I'm thinking like a farmer. And so then I load up the kids, and here we are at the farm, and the to-do list is not getting done because I'm dragging through the day with these 2 kids that need me. And I was constantly feeling frustrated and just, I could never get enough done. I could never cross things off the list, all the things off the list. And that frustration, like that mental space that I was in, I think was really the worst part of the day. Not so much the fact that the stuff didn't get done. I mean, yes, it all needs to get done, but you never get it all done no matter what. So I sort of just had to take a breath and realize it's okay. I have to, pare back the expectations a little bit about what I'm going to get done and know that it's getting done. I have a phenomenal full-time employee and a couple of part-time people in the summer who also help out and are totally competent and do a great job. And, I think a lot of us carry this sense that we need to be there and be part of the team in a really hands-on way, at least at the scale we're farming at. And, I've made a conscious choice that I like this scale, I like being in the field and being hands-on. And I also like having the management responsibilities, but I don't want to lose touch with the field work. And so I had to relinquish some of that expectation that I was going to do as much field work, and it all got done, it's okay at the end of the day. So not to say that I was able to stop being frustrated on, in a given day, or feel like there were certain things that really needed to be taken care of and couldn't because of the kids. But
both of the kids are still alive.
They're still alive.
You didn't lose anybody in the broccoli field or Is your husband involved with the farm?
No, not at all, actually. So he's an acupuncturist, and he has his own clinic about 20 minutes north of where we live, and his own business. So we actually have 2 totally separate businesses. We do share some clientele, actually, but he does his thing and I do mine, and we actually have separate finances because it's sort of complicated with two businesses. So we're very independent financially and business wise. And I don't know, kind of like my business arrangement with my mom and my sister, it works really well. I sometimes think, what would it be like to farm with your partner? But someone once told me, oh, don't get your money where you get your honey. So I think that it takes away certain stress that would be implicit in our relationship if he was part of the farm as well. But it also means that, he's not as much part of the farm. So in that idyllic utopian image of the family farm with this, it's a different setup we have. We've got my mom and my sister and I, and oftentimes all the kids. My sister has a 5-year-old as well. So there's, cousins and siblings and all the rest, grandparents, just no husbands in the picture.
It's got to be a little bit intimidating for the males in your lives. They just give us our space, they steer clear and figure we got it handled. And I shouldn't say that they're never part of the farm. I mean, we will do things that they fold into, like make an apple cider every fall, and some of the more celebratory, fun aspects of the farm. You let them participate in some of the events.
But yeah, for the most part, we just do it our way.
So Zoe, we're going to stop here and get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back.
The Farmer to Farmer podcast is sponsored by Vermont Compost Company, helping plants make sugar from sunshine since 1992. In the wild, where our crop plants' ancestors evolved their microbial partnerships, plants are provided with nutrients from the soil through the work of partner microbes in their employ. Wide-ranging roots reach an abundant supply of nutrients and microbes, even in less than ideal conditions. And now that you've gone and stuck that seed in a little tiny container, it has to get everything it needs right there in a few cubic centimeters of soil. By providing compost-based potting soils chock full of microbial partners and humus-bound nutrients, Vermont Compost ensures that your plants have what they need consistently. And now, through December 21st, Vermont Compost pre-buy program can help you get what your plants need at the best price, with the best shipping options, delivered at a time that works best for you. Plus, their shared truckloads program organizes shipping to other regions in ways that get shipping prices down to the level you'd pay right there in the great state of Vermont. Makers of living media for organic growers since 1992. VermontCompost.com. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by BCS America. A BCS two-wheel tractor is the only power equipment a market gardener will need, with PTO-driven attachments like the rototiller, flail mower, power harrow, rotary plow, snow thrower, log splitter, and more. You name it, and you can probably run it with a versatile BCS two-wheel tractor. The first time I used a rototiller way back in 1991, it was mounted to a BCS two-wheel tractor, and it spoiled me for life. When you get behind a BCS, you can tell that it's built to the same commercial standards as four-wheeled farm tractors. I've used other tillers and mowers and spent most of the time thinking about how much easier it would be with a BCS. On my own farm, we went through a number of so-called solutions before we finally got smart and bought a BCS. And even though we owned a four-wheel tractor to manage our 20 acres of vegetables, the BCS tackled important jobs that we couldn't do with the larger machine, from mowing steep slopes and around trees to working in our high tunnels. Check out bcsamerica.com to see the full lineup of tractors and attachments.
All right, and welcome back. We're here with Zoe Bradbury of Valley Flora. Zoe, I guess we kind of talked about a lot of soft stuff here, family and kids and relationships and getting back to the farm. But can you tell us some about the actual farm itself, acres and crops and horses and tools and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So the farm is a total of 90 acres. 50 of that, 40 of that is in timber, and actually kind of unmanaged at the moment. We're a little busy to be timber barons also, but it's in the long-term goals to be managing that sustainably, hopefully with my draft horse. And then we've got about 30 acres in pasture, mostly hillside pasture. And the balance, about 20 acres, is in bottomland right along the river. And so that obviously is where our primo row crop ground is. We're currently farming half of that bottom ground. It's in orchard very, very diverse orchard. Apples, pears, plums, Asian pears, quince, cherries, peaches, you name it. Blueberries. We've got perennial caneberries, marionberries, tayberries, loganberries, thornless blackberries. A lot of strawberries, which we grow actually as an annual, kind of California style. And then all kinds of annual vegetable row crops, every kind of the whole produce aisle, everything that we can grow in this climate, which is most things, not okra, not bananas, not things like that, but most of the stuff that you would expect in a temperate maritime climate. And then my mom's got a small herd of sheep. I have one draft horse, used to have a team, but lost one of them a couple years ago to colic. So I'm just using a single horse these days. And we're definitely a mixed power farm. So we've got a diesel tractor, an electric ACG cultivating tractor, and the horse, and a bunch of horse-drawn implements, and then all of the hand tools you would expect on an organic small-scale farm. And our farm markets to a host of restaurants, stores. We have a CSA. That's half of what we do. And then we've got a really great and growing farmstand and U-pick enterprise that was sort of the surprise of the whole enterprise. I started growing strawberries. That was one of the main things I focused on right off the bat after I saw how potentially lucrative they could be when I worked for a farmer down in California. And I started I'd leave the strawberries in for 2 years, and that second year, I had all these second-year berries that aren't as big or as productive. So I started opening it up to U-pick by appointment. And there's really no other U-pick in our area, and there really aren't a lot of other farms of this type either. Our coastal climate really pushes most of the agriculture in the direction of livestock, cranberries, hay, but not vegetable production. And so there were a lot of people who, were excited to come get strawberries, and then it became a self-serve thing. So we'd be open on certain days for certain hours, and they could just come weigh themselves out, and it was all on our system. And then it just kept growing. And at one point, someone finally said, "So where are the veggies?" I assumed all along that people wouldn't buy vegetables. I just figured they're coming for the sugar. And
because, Southern Oregon.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And then people started asking, "So when are you going to have produce?" And so I started harvesting, a few bunches of that and a few bunches of this and putting it out, and it would all sell. And it was all, again, like unattended, self-serve on our system. So that went on for a couple of years. And then it finally got to the point where I was like, okay, this is actually maybe worth staffing. So we hired someone to be our farm stand attendant, and that was, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And since then, it's just, the farm stand business has grown exponentially. So the produce is a huge part of the farm stand now. It's really cool. And we've got these, loyal locals who come every single week, once or twice a week. And then there's always the summertime tourist passersby that'll come out. And the U-pick berries have maintained their popularity for sure. So I added all those marionberries and the trailing caneberries to satisfy some of the U-pickers as well. And there's flowers, there's herbs, so they can come and, get a handful of different things U-pick and then stock up on their weekly veggies as well. So that farm stand operates basically from April through December, and it is still self-serve April and May, and then the summer months from June through September, it's twice a week, staffed, full U-pick, and then starting in October through the fall, it's just once a week, and by now the U-pick is over because of the weather.
And are you selling stuff that doesn't come from your own farm at the farm stand?
We have a neighbor who does pastured eggs, and so sometimes she'll bring a cooler of eggs up and we'll sell those for her. There used to be a great bread baker in the area, and we'd sell his bread. So we've done some of that, but for the most part right now it's just our stuff. It depends on sort of what the other local food entrepreneurs are up to and what their markets are like. But we definitely have made it one of our priorities to try to promote the other local food businesses in our area as much as possible, largely through the CSA. I write a weekly newsletter, and we'll pump the broilers or the heritage turkeys that are getting ready to be slaughtered for Thanksgiving, or whatever local food stuff we can. we also have, local sustainable fisheries in our neck of the woods. So there's a fish CSA that we've promoted and have acted a little bit as a food hub for some of these products. Like we sell the neighbors' eggs through our CSA as egg shares. My employee's sister has a restaurant and she makes homemade tamales. So we actually sell tamale shares through our CSA as well.
Cool.
Yeah. Once a month, frozen tamale share. So yeah, stuff like that. And as a result, it's been pretty cool to see the local food system really, really grow legs in this area. This area where they said, no one's going to buy that yuppie food. Southern Oregon. Langlois, our little town, has really become this hotbed of great local farm direct food.
And maybe we should have set the stage earlier for Southern Oregon, for people that aren't familiar, but it's not, you guys don't really have any big cities down there.
No.
You're talking towns of maybe, 8 and 16,000 people.
Oh, no, not even that big.
Okay.
Coos Bay is an hour north, and that's the biggest coastal town. I think it's got 30,000 people. But where we are, Langlois has 400 people, and Port Orford to the south has 1,000, and Bandon to the north has 2,500. It's really rural, and yeah.
Yeah, it's not. It's certainly not the place that I would look and expect to see what you guys are doing actually taking off, and
right.
And it doesn't seem like just making it. You guys seem like you're thriving or doing something close to that.
Yeah, no, it's profitable, and I think we're all making a living doing it. I think part of the magic is the fact that there isn't another farm right next door doing the same thing. I'm not saying we have a monopoly. I think we're pretty fair in our pricing, but I'm sure that helps because it drives any local interest to us, unless they want to, get in the car and drive 3 hours to the valley, to the Willamette Valley or the Roseburg area to UPick or find some farm food there. So I think that's something for people to consider when they're thinking about wanting to start up a farm. It seems like a lot of people always want to be just an hour outside of Portland or, somewhere in striking distance of these local food meccas. And I think there's really a lot of opportunity to be had in these smaller, more out of the way places that aren't served by farms like ours yet. And I think that there's been such a cultural shift in a decade, even in the amount of time I've been farming, where there's a huge new awareness about local farms and local food and getting it straight from the source. And I think it makes it a lot easier to enter into these less obvious potential markets.
Do you feel like there's things that you've done particularly well that have helped to grow that local market for you?
Well, I think we've just stayed really focused on quality and kindness. It's when you live in a small town, word travels fast, and it really matters to treat people well and have integrity in business. And so we do that on one hand by just making sure the food that we send out is top notch, and then just make sure that the interactions that are had with all of the people who support us are good ones as much as possible, So I think, it just slowly built a reputation and a presence that's a positive one.
How much do you guys emphasize in that marketing environment that you're an organic farm? And I should ask, are you guys certified organic?
No, we're not certified. We're in that category of farms that have chosen not to be certified, but do everything as if they were. So we don't really, legally we can't say we're organic. So when we describe our growing practices to people, like we have a chalkboard at the farm stand that says our growing practices, and basically we grow as if we were organic, but we're not third party certified, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, we let people know, but it's not like big front and center, boom, trying to make that the thrust of our marketing. I think the local thing is just as important to people around here. And maybe I can say that knowing that they know we're in integrity with organic standards because they come to the farm and they see what we do and they know us personally or have a long-term relationship with the farm. But if we were selling, say, to, wholesale market, like to New Seasons in Portland or, some grocery chain farther flung from where we are, I would think we would really need that TILF stamp or that USDA organic stamp. But we really have made a conscious decision to just market within about 50 miles of the farm. We go about as far north as Coos Bay and as far south as Gold Beach, both of which are within that 50-mile range. And a big part of that is just because we don't want to spend all that time on the road driving food around, both in terms of the quality of life that brings upon you and just the ecological impact of it. So we've been fortunate enough that the scale that we've honed in on at the farm is a good one for that 50-mile market area that we've plugged into.
So I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that you've got the draft horse on the farm.
Yeah.
The Alice Chalmers G and then the diesel tractor. It seems to me like a lot of times if you were making decisions about how to get things done, that the tractor or the G are almost always going to be faster than the draft horse.
Yeah.
Where do you fit the draft horse into your operation? Because I feel like that's kind of an important thing to you.
Yeah, it is. Maud is the mare, my draft mare. She's a Belgian, and I have just a huge passion for horses. I have since I was a little girl and used to ride and had saddle horses. So it was this, very romantic dream of mine, starting back when I was, a teenager, that I would have this team of draft horses and I would farm with them. And it was partly because I grew up riding all the time in a recreational way. And then when I started getting interested in gardening and growing food, it was taking away from my riding time. And so I started thinking, well, maybe I could merge them and I could actually work horses in the context of growing food. But of course it was far-fetched. I didn't know anyone who harnessed horses up and drove them around a farm. And it wasn't until I actually left my job at Zoe Organics, I had, for the first time in years, I had an empty summer ahead of me with no plans. And I decided, this is the time to go figure out if this is viable and if it's something I actually really do like. And I ended up in Montana with this master teamster, Doc Hamill. And I spent a couple months on his ranch on the Front Range, just south of Glacier National Park, basically, doing a work trade with him. I pulled noxious weeds and built fence line and tore down part of his barn and built it back up, all in exchange for learning how to hitch and harness and drive horses. And I loved it, just like I thought I would. And so I spent some more time with him over the next few years until he finally gave me his blessings to start looking for a team. And he helped me find Maud and Barney, who were out in Spokane area, and dragged them home. And actually it was in 2008. So it was the same year that I started up the whole farm. That was part of the stress for my mom. I'm sure it was like, oh, great.
I kind of imagining the eye roll when you rolled
exactly.
in. Yeah.
Oh, here she comes. And she has 4,000 pounds of horse flesh in tow. Like, what the? It was a steep learning curve, even though I had been, learning from various teamsters and spent all that time with Doc, to suddenly be fully responsible for my own 2 draft horses and all the equipment that I was trying to, pull out of hedgerows and weld back together with friends' help and then actually put them to use on a working farm, my first ever growing season. I even roll my eyes like, oh my God, if only I had been a little wiser, I would have waited a year or two. But here we are, and I've learned a lot. I've only had 1 runaway. I'm proud of that. And only a few broken pieces of equipment so far. But Maud, basically, I went into it highly idealistic and trying to farm with as few fossil fuel inputs as possible and use the horses as much as possible. But like you said, it's like a half hour to hitch them up, harness them up, and get them ready. And then there you go. You're out trying to get something done. And as a novice teamster, it's all kinds of things can go wrong all the time with the horse's behavior. It's usually all because of me doing something wrong and getting them flustered or in a mess. So Yeah, I put a lot of pressure on myself those first couple of years around the horses. And then of course I get pregnant and suddenly I have this infant and I'm still trying to farm with horses. And it starts to become somewhat clear to me, like, oh, maybe this is what gender roles were all about back in the day when people were farming full time with horses. Like, a little bit unsafe to strap your newborn baby to your chest and then get on the disc behind two draft horses and go to work. So a lot shifted when I became a mom, because in order to work the horses, I felt like, to be safe, I needed to have childcare to watch my kid at that time, which suddenly meant that working the horses involved scheduling with someone, whether it was my mom or a babysitter. And then there's a time constraint put on your work with your horses, which inevitably makes you just a little bit tense, and the horses pick up on that right away. So What I had to do was just back off from that pie in the sky expectation that I was going to be such a purist with horses, and start using the tractor more, and just kind of cave in to that's a series of decisions I made. Like, I can't necessarily have it all to the hilt. So that's kind of where we're at with Maud at this point, is that she plays actually a really crucial role in certain ways on the farm. She does things that no other piece of equipment can do. Like when leeks or Brussels sprouts get too tall for the G to straddle, we can get between them with Maud and a single row walk behind cultivator. And she actually does a far more thorough, better job than any set of cultivating sweeps we can do.
Why is that?
Well, it's maybe just the genius of this old equipment. I have this probably 100-year-old walk behind cultivator, and its width is adjustable, and it's just designed beautifully so that you don't really miss a spot with all the sweeps. And I work with Roberto, my employee, so he drives the cultivator and I drive the horse, and because he's completely focused on the cultivator, he can make little minor adjustments and boom, get that thistle, or catch that shepherd's purse, that one outlying weed, by steering the cultivator. So it's a wonderful threesome, that our team, the Roberto, Zoe, Maud team, and we get a ton of work done in a really short amount of time. So those kinds of things, nothing else could do. And we can cultivate up until the last second in things like potatoes, and before the squash closes in, or, in the leeks, like all those single row crops. In my artichoke patch, she's great in there as well. Asparagus, that's another place. I credit Maud with actually having made our asparagus patch profitable, because, beating back weeds in an organic asparagus patch is quite a endeavor.
I just gave up on that.
I remember when I planted it, after I planted my asparagus into, a newly turned bit of sod, I contacted the perennial weed specialist at Washington State University. And I said, so what kind of research do you have about weed control in organic asparagus? And he said, oh, well, unless you have eradicated the entire weed seed bank from wherever you're planting them, before you plant them, I don't even bother. And of course, mine are already in the ground, and oh God, he was probably right, but we persevered, and now we've got this super clean mostly weed-free asparagus. And I think being able to run through it with Maud just over and over and over, and a few other things we did, has made it work. So she also does, she does a ton of cultivation for us in May and June primarily. And then I use her a lot in the fall for cultipacking in all my cover crop seed, because we get much better germination when we get that nice soil to seed contact from the cultipacker. So that's just one of the sort of zen things I get to do with her in September and October, is, roll all over the farm with her and bring that cover crop up. And it's wonderful. Those are some of my favorite days on the farm, and they still are. And unfortunately, they're not as frequent as I'd like. But I hold high hopes that as my kids get older and my life loosens up a little bit in that way, I'll be able to work with horses again a lot more.
So Zoe, do you actually live there on the farm? I mean, you mentioned that it's a separate house, but is it part of the farmstead there?
No, we actually live about 2.5 miles down the road in Langlois, the bustling burb of Langlois, population 400. And that was something that I originally really struggled with, because I had held this fantasy, of course, of, the quintessential farmstead where you live right there and your warm barn is just across the farmyard and your fields spread out all around you. But the fact is, the house where we grew up in, my mom lives there. It's her house. And when Abby and I both ended up back here, she made it really clear that this is my house and no, you don't get to live here. So she and I actually both ended up buying houses in Langlois, a couple miles down the road. And at first, I actually secretly cried for the first 2 weeks of getting the keys to this place. It's a cool old house. It's like from the 1870s. It's the old schoolhouse in Langlois, and but it's not what I had pictured. And we got the keys, and then literally maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, got on an airplane and flew to Italy for the 2010 Terra Madre gathering. We got to go as delegates, and we stayed outside of Torino at this little agriturismo, and I had this great epiphany while I was in Italy, which was that nobody really lives on their farm here in Italy. Most people live in these little villages up on the hill, and then they commute down to their field. And it was really helpful because it really helped shift the paradigm for me and made me realize when I came home, like, oh, I live in the village, and how sweet, my kids' preschool is across the street, and I can ride my bike down to the diner or the post office or the market real quick. And so it was useful because I think, in this day and age, it's not that everyone gets to live that idyllic little farm scene that we imagine or see in the storybook. Everyone's got all kinds of creative arrangements these days in order to get access to land. So it was good to come to peace with that at a personal level and realize that maybe it's also good sometimes to have a little distance from the place because I'll stop working.
Well, and I know that when I sold my farm and moved to town, it was like, oh my God, everything was so easy. I mean, you want food, you go to the grocery store.
Right.
It's like, I guess in some ways, it's not much for a grocery store.
What?
Yeah.
I have to admit, I do suffer from the disease a little bit. Like I come home and we actually have almost 2 acres here, and we have a big horse barn because the people we got it from were major 4-H folks. And so Maud actually winters here close to home. And, I have a garden at home and I have a chicken coop, and I sort of am creating that little storybook fairy tale here in my backyard, but in the middle of town and not connected to the whole farm elsewhere. So it's maybe my thwarted fantasy manifesting itself in its own special way.
But I do think there is something about having that separation. When we went to Terra Madre in, I think it was 2004, we stayed with a family who farmed, but it was in an apartment in town, up on like the 4th floor.
Yeah.
And I remember it was kind of a shock to me, but you could also, you did get that sense, when you're home, you're home. When you're at work, you're at work. And I know just even having an office in the house was always enough, and still sometimes is, to just work as sort of my default setting.
Yeah.
And I've had to work really hard to shift my focus. Now I've got a 13-year-old daughter and living with a partner to say, okay, I'm closing the door.
Right.
But, and I think it's really hard to close the door on the farm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that, especially because my husband doesn't farm, it sometimes creates a little bit of tension in our household because to him, it's like, what? You're doing what now at this hour? Why can't you just not work? Why do you have to bring it home with you? But I don't know. I think that there's things about being a farmer that you don't ever get unless you are fully immersed in farming. And there's always something to take care of, whether it's on the computer or in the field. Yeah.
Attending to that QuickBooks.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, Zoe, let's turn here to our lightning round that we do at the end of every show. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
I think it's that walk behind cultivator I described to you that Maud pulls. Honestly, it's for a few reasons. I mean, it's just such an elegant, beautiful piece of old equipment. It gets so much work done for us. And the actual process of using it is so joyful and fun that it's just, my mom always said that men have to be decorative, functional, and entertaining. Those are like the 3 criteria for a good one. And I think that's kind of true of that tool. It's beautiful to behold. It is incredibly functional, and we laugh while we're using it. So there you go.
That's so great. Tell us a little bit more about the tool, if you can help us visualize it here.
Yeah, it's
on the radio.
Right. So it's basically, imagine like you've got 2 like plow handles. It's shaped like a plow, that sort of V shape with the handles coming back towards you. And then the belly of this tool has a combination of shovels and sweeps on it. And it has a lever that you can adjust that pushes it out wider or squunches it in narrower depending on your row width. And it's built in such a way that even when it's at its widest setting, you still don't miss anything in that path. So it has a pretty wide shovel sweep in the back, and then a series, like another shovel in the front, a sweep in the front, and then some other little shovels in between. And
so you're really cultivating down between 2 rows at a time.
Yeah, right. So basically the furrow, okay. You're able to pass through the furrow, and it's too wide to go, in any bed that's planted to more than one single line on our bed spacing. We're on 42-inch centers. And so all of our single row crops, it works really, really well with. But if we get into anything closer, like a 2-line or 3-line crop, then it would take out the outer rows of those beds. So we're limited in the single line aspect, but that might be something that continues to be more and more useful, because we're actually currently doubling the footprint of the farm. So we have another, 9 acres of bottomland that's been pasture. And right now we're in the process of converting it over for cash crop production starting next season. So with that extra space, the main idea for us is to just be able to have an even better rotation on the farm, not necessarily to increase production too much, but to, be able to fallow and cover crop in the summer and more of that. So we might have a little more room for more single row crops as well, which would mean more work for Maud.
More work for Maud, and sounds like a little bit easier for the weed control for you.
Yeah.
All right. What's the last book that you read?
The last book that I read, I'm going to have to think about this for a second. I just finished.
That's probably a really evil question to ask to somebody that's got a 10-month-old and farms.
Oh, well, there you go. It says a lot, the fact that I can't even remember because I have nursing brain. It puts like sponge holes in your cerebellum. It was a novel. I'll say that, though. Obviously left a really big impression on me.
So when that nursing brain creeps in and you need information, what's your favorite resource to turn to?
Well, we have this really awesome farmer-to-farmer network in the Northwest. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's a group that gets together once a year for an actual face-to-face gathering up at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, which is not a bad place to get together in the winter and soak in the thermal pools and talk farming. And then we're connected year-round by an email listserv, and you can post to that anytime with any question, and usually you get a whole host of awesome replies from farmers that you may know or may not, depending on how new they are to the network. And because we have this actual, FaceTime with each other in the winter, we have a pretty good idea of each other's operations. Usually there's slideshows at that gathering. And so when you hear back from them over email, it's in a context that you can picture and maybe have seen photos of or have had conversations about. So that's usually the first place I go to. And it's awesome. It's just such a great, great resource to have these real on-the-ground farmers who are doing great, innovative things that have probably been through whatever you're going through or solved the problem you're trying to solve. And there's awesome conversations that come out those listserv interactions.
And is that something that anybody in your area can be a part of? Well,
the event itself is limited by Brighton Bush's occupancy, and so it's actually kind of a limited gathering face to face. I don't know if you can be part of the listserv without having been to the conference, but I'm not sure. It's a good question.
And what's your favorite crop to grow?
My favorite crop to grow, it might well be fennel. I love fennel. It's just such a beautiful plant, for one. And then I personally love to eat it. And it's one of the things that I've really made an effort to extend the season on as much as possible on the farm, just so that I have it to eat. And it's ironic because it's one of the things that I really have to make an effort and coach my CSA members to like, because a lot of people recoil from that subtle black licorice hint of flavor.
Especially if they've had a bad experience with ouzo at some point in their life.
And I'm always singing its praises and trying to get them to love it. And I've determined that in CSAs there's real polarity around certain vegetables, and one of them is fennel. There's like fennel lovers and fennel haters, and there's not a lot in between. And the same thing with beets. They just love them or they hate them. So I don't know how many I've converted to fennel, but I keep trying.
And any great tips for prospective fennel growers out there? One
of the things that I learned actually kind of by accident with fennel is that it's one of those resurrection plants. So you can cut it down and cut the whole bulb. And then if you leave that stump there, it'll grow back a whole bunch of baby fennels. And so actually sometimes full-size fennels. So if you just didn't have enough time to get through with the tractor and till it under, it actually will yield a whole nother crop for you. So that's one way we've extended our fennel season, is to just leave the stumps. And usually they're co-planted with our beets, like at the top of the beet bed, because we can't grow. We have 220-foot beds, so we can't grow and sell a full bed of fennel at one whack at our scale. So we just plant, a quarter of a bed with the beets, and then the beets are there longer anyway, so we just leave the stumps and they come back around with a whole nother crop of fennel. So then we can sell baby fennel for twice as much per pound, and you didn't even have to bend over to plant it the second time.
Which is especially nice when you have a baby on your back, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And what does Valley Flora want for Christmas?
Oh my God, a Sprinter van. We have like probably a lot of farms, we have this whole fleet of used vehicles, and all of them are named after whoever we bought them from. So our van is Frank, named after the used car salesman, and our flatbed is Richie Ha Ha, named after the really funny guy that we got our little Toyota from on Craigslist. And anyway, Frank, our van, is not always reliable, and we've definitely had a few rescue missions when the van is fully loaded with all the restaurant deliveries and CSA totes, and it overheats on the big hill on the way to Coos Bay, and I could just live without that ever happening again.
That's fair. Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah.
It seems like a reasonable request of Santa.
Yeah. I don't know if Santa has an extra $15,000 kicking around, but yeah.
And finally, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
Oh, maybe something along the lines of take a deep breath. Life is long, hopefully, as far as diving in and doing all of it at once, trying to manifest the whole big fat dream all in a year or two. You start to realize like, oh, there's another year and another one after that, if we're lucky. And it unfolds, and it's ever evolving. I mean, just when you think we've hit homeostasis, I mean, maybe for some people you would, because of their personality likes it to stay the same. But with my personality, I'm always kind of scheming and dreaming about how it could be better, how it could be more efficient, how it could be more profitable, how it could be more fun. And so as a result, it'll never be static. And what a blessing, because it keeps it really, really fun and inspiring. Every single year is a new adventure.
Zoe, thank you so much for being part of the Farmer to Farmer podcast today.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's really great to listen to the other episodes and get a little glimpse into all these worlds.
All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 42 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast. And you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Bradbury. That's Bradbury. I'm really excited to announce once again a series of workshops that I'm doing this fall on employee management. Employees make it possible to get more done, but managing workers and their work takes dedicated time, energy, and processes. I'll be presenting full-day workshops on managing and motivating employees on the farm in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, this coming Monday, November 30th, and in Columbia, Missouri on Tuesday, December 8th. More information, including schedules and registration information at purplepitchfork.com/betterboss. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you would also enjoy my weekly newsletter, The Flying Rutabaga. The Flying Rutabaga runs the gamut from practical templates for delegation to guidelines for watering transplants. You can sign up at farmertofarmerpodcast.com or purplepitchfork.com. And also, if you enjoyed the show, it would be great if you would pop on over to iTunes and leave us a review or make a comment on the show notes or tell your friends on Facebook. These reviews and referrals are the bread and butter of making this show available to an ever wider group of listeners. And you know what else? I'd love to hear your suggestions for guests on the show. I know a lot of things, but I know that I don't know all of the great farmers out there. Zoe's a great example. This was a referral from a referral. Please visit farmertofarmerpodcast.com and use the contact form to tell me who you'd like to hear. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.